Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is my buddy Gurf Morlix. He's going to talk about his friendship with Blaze Foley.
Was playing in Austin at a little club called the Hole in the Wall. I had this little duo with a guy named Mark McKinnon, who you may be familiar with. I don't know. That's another interesting story. But we were just playing at the Hole in the Wall, and this guy came up to me in between songs, carrying this guitar case. A big, long-haired hippie cowboy guy, cowboy hat on, and just a real weirdo, you know, and he wanted to show me this guitar that he had. He wanted to sell it to me. It was an old acoustic guitar, you know, early 1900s. And he wanted to show it to me in between songs. I'm going, hey, you know, we're in the middle of a set. I'll talk to you on a break. And then I went over on the break and talked to him, and I found out that I liked him. He was funny, and we just kind of became friends. He came by the house, and, you know, of course, Blaze was pretty much homeless the whole time I knew him, except for a little bit at the end when he got a little tiny bit of money. But I found out that he had a gig coming up like later that week in a disco. It was a happy hour set in a disco right behind the Hole in the Wall. And he said, you know, would you come and would you bring a bunch of people with you? And I said, well, I'll see what I can do. And so Mark McKinnon and I went, and you know, there was, you know, 6 or 8 people just kind of sitting around him on stage in this disco, or maybe he was out on the floor. I can't remember, but he was like no one I'd ever seen. You know, he would play these songs, and then he had a valise with him, and he would open the valise and pull out pictures of the person in the song, and he'd pass the picture around and say, here's the person from this song, and then he'd play the song. And it was just, he had weird little toys, and it was just like a weird show and tell kind of a thing. And I'd never seen anyone do that. It was really personable, and I just, you know, I fell in love with his music. Yeah, he had just written If I Could Only Fly. He played that. And I remember he played a few songs that he sort of later stopped playing, but he had written the bulk of the good stuff at that point. And, you know, he had some problems. He had drug and alcohol problems and behavioral problems, and you know, started this long, slow downhill slide into alcoholism and homelessness. And the writing stopped. At one point, he met Townes Van Zandt. And, you know, anybody that, when you meet Townes, he was a vodka drinker, you know, or anything really, but he drank a lot of vodka. And when you meet Townes and you get to hang with him, you want to drink with him. You know, it's probably the same as trying to keep up with Keith Richards. You know, it's like, so everybody tried to be Townes, and it killed some of them, and it killed Townes, and it killed Blaze. You know, it was a bad thing. But when Blaze met Townes, that's kind of when it turned into the binge drinking, the vodka and you know, mixed with meth, and you know, stay up for days, and it was really unhealthy. The only times I ever saw him be, well, yeah, it was, you know, he, like on this long, slow downhill slide, he could become vindictive. He'd get a grudge against somebody for a slight, or you know, maybe it was an imagined slight, or maybe it wasn't, you know, but seed would grow, and you know, I saw him be violent a couple times, get beat up, you know. That was pretty sad, but I loved him. You know, I'd haul him out of there and patch him up, you know, and take him home. And when Blaze and Townes were hanging out in bars, you know, it's like I'd spend an afternoon hanging out with them, and we went for lunch somewhere, and it just turned into this drinking session. And we drank in this bar till we ran out of money. Vince Bell was there too. It was me and Vince and Townes and Blaze. And got any money? Nobody had any money. And Blaze and Townes, well, we know what to do. And they just started becoming obnoxious. And they were harassing the waitress, and they were harassing the customers. And I was just horribly embarrassed. It was really awful behavior. And if it was just Blaze, they would just kick him out, you know, bodily, you know, they'd throw him out the door. But it was Townes, so you would ask Townes to leave because he was Towns. And so the manager finally came over, and then Blaze and Towns said, you give us $10, you won't see us again all day. So he gave us $10. So we went to the next bar and drank that money up. And then when that was gone, they did the same thing again. They just turned on the Obnoxo thing, It was amazing. And, they were well versed in it. I was so embarrassed. But I couldn't not pay attention to what was going on. It was too fascinating, It was like a freak show.
How about the kind, generous side of Blaze?
Amazing. And a champion of the underdog. And, if you were his friend, he would defend you to the death. And that's how he died, defending a friend. An old drinking buddy of his who had a son who was a junkie, and he and Blaze had gone around a couple of times about this kid stealing his father's Social Security checks, cashing them and using the money for heroin, and so it just it led to Blaze's demise, and it didn't have to happen, but it sort of did for Blaze, because he would defend you. I had left Austin and moved to LA. I left in 81, I think it was. And that's kind of around the time 80, 81 was when he started his downhill slide. So I would only go to the outhouse when I would come back from LA and have a gig in Austin, and I'd find Blaze. And, I'd just go to the street. I'd know where to find him, and I'd always find him. One time I came back and he had cleaned up. He'd quit drinking, and I said, well, let's test this, So I took him to the outhouse, and I had a beer and he had a Coke or something, and it was good. And then, I got home from a gig one night, and there was a phone machine message, and it was Lucinda, and she said, I got something I want to tell you. I'll call you tomorrow. And I turned the message off and just started crying. And I don't know how I knew, but I knew it was Blaze. I didn't know how bad it was. I knew, I called her the next morning when I woke up and said, what happened to Blaze? And she said, well, he got shot. And I said, is he alive? And she goes, no, he's dead. I wasn't there when it happened. I came back for the funeral, but I wasn't in town right then. The funeral was just chaos, as it should be, And it was about 15 degrees, February 1st or something like that. That's about as cold as Austin gets, It was brutal. And I flew back, and this ne'er-do-well friend of Blaze's picked me up at the airport. I didn't know. I thought another guy was coming for me. And it was this ne'er-do-well friend. And he said, well, I don't have a driver's license anymore. I haven't driven in 10 years, but someone loaned me this car. They said, go get you. And I knew the guy. And then we leave the airport, and we get on 35 heading south, and we ran out of gas. He goes, I said, did you look at the gauge? He goes, I haven't driven in 10 years. It's 15 degrees, and we had to walk to get gas, It was chaotic, and then there was a lot of people there. And I sat kind of in the front because I was supposed to be a pallbearer, but I hadn't hooked up with anybody, and so they took care of that. But I didn't really get to see who all was there, except they were all behind me. And it was so cold afterwards, we just went right to the car. I did see Towns briefly, but there might have been 500 people in there, or 900. It just seemed like a giant crowd. Blaze had a lot of friends, but he liked people, and he met people, and he would champion them and stand up for them, and so he had a lot of friends. And then they loaded his body into the hearse, and they were, going to this cemetery way out in South Austin, deep South Austin. And there wasn't enough money. They had to do a benefit at the outhouse to raise money to get him out of the funeral home, to pay the funeral home, because it was just, none of these people had any money. They're all ne'er-do-wells, And this was, Austin before Austin became Austin, the new Austin, So they didn't have enough money to get a police escort or, anything to the funeral home. So, we got in our car and we were like the second or third behind the hearse. I think we were like 4 or 5 cars back. And so heading down South Congress, we come to the first traffic light, and the hearse and like 3 cars made it through. And the rest of, like another 40 cars stopped and didn't have any idea where the cemetery was. And it was just absolute chaos. And so, like the light turns and 8 cars go through, and then the light stops again. And so here's a line of 8 cars. And then, we turn, let's go back, let's do this. And, we're driving back up, and I see Champ Hood and like 8 more cars behind him coming in from a side street, and everybody was just hunting. And I would say, I bet 80 or 90% of the people who were going to go to the cemetery couldn't find it. And, it's just everything associated with Blaze was always all fucked up in a really great way. And this is just very typical, It's like, I found it very funny. He would just reach down and mix things up, because he appreciated the chaos of the situation.
Was there duct tape on the coffin?
Yeah, there were rolls of duct tape. I've heard different stories. People talk about, we duct taped the entire coffin. No, just people were, tearing off. It's like putting an armband on or something. Just tear off a piece of duct tape and paste it to them. And it was so cold. I remember Kimmy Rhodes sang something at the gravesite, and I had never heard her sing before, and it was positively eerie. She's an amazing singer, and just I brought goosebumps on top of my goosebumps from it being 15. I was like,
what would Blaze think if he would have had a vision of the future where there's a movie about him?
Oh man, he would just be amazed. Blaze never even got to tour. He only got to play in the few cities and towns he lived in, he never got to go to Europe. He didn't, I don't know if he knew how good his songs were, I don't think he would have ever thought that John Prine would be covering his song, It's like, it's just, it's remarkable. Well, he knew about Merle and Wylie. They had cut If I Could Only Fly. And Blaze actually got a check. He got his first royalty check, and I don't remember how much it was, but he rented a room in a house in South Austin. And the last time I was in Austin before he died, I went there. I found him on the street, and he took me to his house, and that was the time that he was sober. And we went to the outhouse and tested his sobriety, and he was really proud of having a place to live that he was paying for the first time, and he was doing artwork because he was sober, and he had his room decorated with his artwork, and it was really encouraging. And then, like I said, a few weeks later, I got the call.
Is his artwork out there?
It can be found. His sister had some, and it's online, I think. It's a lot of bright, swirly color things done with, markers, and it's unique. It surprised me. I'd never known him to do that, Well, he had no touring history. They talked about a European tour. Blaze fucked that all up, He was in such bad shape, he wouldn't have been able to deal with that. When he started the binge drinking he started blowing off gigs because he didn't have a ride, and he would rather stay wherever he was and drink vodka than try to get to his gig that he'd booked. It's like it was low down. Blaze and I used to play this club in Houston called Corky's. A little fern bar held about 100 people or something maybe, and we played there a lot. And I played there with a whole bunch of different people, It was our home base, and, in a month, I might play there 23, 4 times, and I'd go there on the nights that I wasn't playing there. My twin reverb lived at Corky's for a couple of years, stored on stage or in the back room. And so Blaze had met Towns, and he told the owner of the club, I can bring Towns in for a Friday and Saturday if you want, And so they agreed to that, and Blaze organized a band. It was like a 6-piece band or something, and they were there. And Towns was supposed to come in early and rehearse, and then he didn't make that. So Friday night, and the club owner was worried because of Towns' reputation as blowing gigs sometimes. If he blew a gig from being drunk, he would always make that up and do a really good job. He'd come back, and it was a point of honor for him. He knew when he had blown it. So he showed up, and he was relatively sober, and he showed up about 10 minutes late for the gig, maybe, 10 minutes past start time. But we just got on stage and started playing, and it was going fine, and people were liking it. And we finished the gig that night. Oh, Towns, when he set up, he had a saxophone that he leaned against the bass drum. And said he had bought it in a pawn shop, and he didn't play it at all. So we finished the gig, and then we stayed there drinking after the gig till 4 or 5 in the morning, which we did every night pretty much. That was the pattern. And then the club owner said, well, we got to go home. And so I went home. Towns went out somewhere. He found people and just continued to drink from the time we left the club. Blaze was with me. He was living in my apartment in Houston. And so Towns found people somehow and drank until the gig the next night and showed up just gone. But he was doing okay. He was singing the songs, and he was really, really staggering drunk, but pulling it off. And then suddenly at one point during the night, a switch went off in his brain. And in the middle of a line, he switched over to this Cajun gibberish. And that's what it sounded like to me. I don't know what it was. It was like George Jones in the Donald Duck voice or something, And he started singing in this Cajun gibberish. And I think from that point on, it was all Cajun gibberish, every song. And people were getting angry, and people were leaving. And a lot of people were leaving. And one by one, band members were abandoning the stage. And I was just enjoying the freak show aspect. I can't look away from that kind of stuff. I've been attracted to it all my life. And so it just got weirder and weirder. And then at one point, it ended up with just me on bass and Towns. And he put the guitar down. He said something to me, let's play You Got to Move, key of E or something. And so I'm just going boom, 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 boom on the low E string. And then Towns starts singing You Got to Move, Mississippi Fred McDowell song, and in a Cajun gibberish. and then he saw the saxophone and he picked it up. And I had heard him mess with it a couple of notes here and there, and it was really instantly obvious to me that Towns could not play the saxophone at all. He just sounded horribly. So anyhow, he started playing this solo, and Towns was a really kind of magical, mystical person. And I swear he started sounding, it was like the best jazz, crazy saxophone solo I'd ever heard in my life. He was like channeling Coltrane or something. It was insane. And he finished this song, and he threw the sax down, and he walked out the front door and disappeared. I saw him, and by this point, pretty much everybody had gone. There was a couple of tables left, maybe. I saw him in an airport, like 3-4 weeks later somewhere, and said, "Hey, Towns, how's the sax coming?" He said, "I hung it in a tree, and I shot it full of holes." It was part of this gig that someone put together called Millions of Williams, and it was Lucinda and Victoria Williams and the Williams brothers were playing a gig in Hollywood, and she needed a band from LA. She was bringing David Grissom in, I think, to play guitar, but she needed a band, and And the drummer was hanging at my house, and so I drove him over there and watched the rehearsal. And then I think maybe I just played the guitar because the guitar player hadn't gotten there yet. And then I just kind of became the guitar player in that band. And we were scuffling. We were playing in Hollywood clubs. I remember one night we played Raji's and we made $8. And she called me the next day. I had left before getting paid. And she said, I owe you $2 from last night. I said, well, let's just let that ride for a while. I still haven't gotten it. She called up one day and she said, we got a record deal. And this Rough Trade from England, they were kind of a punk rock label, I think. And there was a guy named Robin Hurley that really liked Lucinda's music. And they offered her a deal. And she said, who's going to produce it? And I said, well, I will. And just kind of slowly pulled my foot out of my mouth and did it.
Had you ever produced anything for her?
Not an album that came out like that, but I had, I was always the guy in the band who could run a tape recorder and know where to put the mics, and I knew what it was supposed to sound like. It just seems like common sense to me, but it seems like most people don't have it. Yeah, we had Dusty Wakeman engineering at Mad Dog Studio in LA, and it was just easy, And I was just trying to recreate Late for the Sky and For Every Man, the Jackson Browne albums. I loved those, and that was my template. It was easy. And you start with great songs and a singer who can put them across, and you got to have a great drummer. And then beyond that, it's just don't fuck it up. And then suddenly, we were on tour. We did a national tour, and there were people showing up every night. We show up in Minneapolis, and there's 300 people there standing on the floor. And it was press and a really good album with a really good bunch of songs. Lucinda and I, as a duo, were booked to play this festival, a summer festival in Birmingham, Alabama. And we're getting on the plane, just a cattle call to get on, and slowly, people are slow stowing their luggage, So we're just, we got on in the first class compartment, but everything is going really slow. And I look in the back left corner in front of the bulkhead. I see James Brown on the plane, last row of first class. And so standing there, and I'm going to play it cool here. I nudged Lucinda, and I said, Lucinda, look. And I motioned to over there, and she turned, and she thought I was talking about the guy standing in front of her in line, and he had a T-shirt on that had like a long paragraph. And so she's just standing there for a minute or something, just not doing anything. And then she turns back to me and she goes, what? I don't get it. What? I said, what were you looking at? She goes, this guy's T-shirt. I go, no, in the corner in the last seat. And she looks over there and she screams, it's James Brown! And all of a sudden, everybody on the plane erupts. And then we got there, our seats were right behind the bulkhead. And there were a lot more people coming on after us. They're boarding by section, And so everybody that had come past the bulkhead had just seen James Brown. And I never saw a bunch of happier people in my life getting on that airplane. So then we got to Birmingham, and we're in the airport. I see James getting picked up in his long white limo. And then we go to this hotel. It was an old, nice downtown Birmingham hotel that had built on another wing next door that was a high-rise. So in the lobby of this hotel, and there's this festival's going on, so there's all kinds of acts, and people are all milling about, and we're getting our rooms, and all of a sudden I see these people starting to come out of the offices behind the counter of the hotel. A whole bunch of black people were coming out, these are workers at the hotel, and they were just kind of excited, and I'm going, what's going on? And all of a sudden I see James enter with his valet and a babe on his arm. And he's been checked in already. It's, these people all buzzed about it. They knew. And he's going to turn to go up the escalator to the new wing. And he sees all these people coming out of the offices. And he just did a little step and he went, ow! And went up the escalator. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And everybody in the lobby, and by this point there were 50 or 60 people, and we all just burst into spontaneous applause. There was no thinking involved. It was just, ah! I was on tour with Lucinda, and I think it was '89, and her father was a poet, professor, and a friend of Tom T. Hall. And we got to Nashville, and she said, Tom T. wants us to come over for dinner. We had a night off. And I was thinking, I don't like some of those songs. I didn't know much of his material. I knew there were some good songs, but there were some that were so simple and childlike that I just did not like them. And I had done my fair share of bad-mouthing some Tom T. Hall songs. And I thought, well, I'll go for dinner. That could be interesting. And he sent a limo for us. Took us way out in the country to his house, and I'm thinking, well, this is going to be weird, but it's a free meal, And we got out there, and Tom T. introduced us to Miss Dixie, his wife, and he was friendly, and it was kind of very nice. And then he told Miss Dixie, he said, "Oh, by the way, Larry Gatlin called, and he's coming for dinner tonight too." No, Larry Gatlin, a double whammy, I was like, oh, man. And then over the course of about 15 minutes more conversation, I realized that Tom was joking and felt the same way about Larry Gatlin that I did. It took me a while to tumble. And Tom T. was great. He was a gentleman and told hilarious, funny stories, and it was an absolute pleasure to meet him and get to hang out. He played a song. I think there was only one guitar there, and I think he played a new song that he'd written. And I remember liking it. It was nice. He was a great songwriter and a real character. I wish I'd known him more. What a songwriter. Amazing. What a catalog, and a fine, funny human being. I was young, I didn't know anything at the time, I was in my 30s, It was just I didn't even become an adult till I was about 38, Donald Lindley on drums, who was one of the best musicians I've ever known. He's gone now, and John Chambodi on bass, Dr. John. Who was a chiropractor, he's gone now too. He played bass on My Aim Is True album with Elvis Costello. He was in Clover. I don't know if you remember that band with Huey Lewis and Bay Area band. They moved to England and hooked up with Elvis. And he became a chiropractor, yeah. But he was just a great natural bass player. It was the greatest rhythm section I've ever played with. Yeah, they had somehow they'd read somewhere that this was a really good album, and they showed up and they were ready. And it was kind of surprising, Our first gig in New York was the Bottom Line, there were some places, where they weren't as aware, we'd get to Knoxville or somewhere, and it'd be a smaller crowd. But
was it that record that you did, Austin City Limits?
I'm trying to remember now. I know we did one. Just me and Lucinda, and it was in the round with Roseanne Cash and Bruce Coburn. But then we finally, I think it might have been like 90 or 91, 92, I can't remember any of that stuff. We did one with the whole band, and that was great. It was magical. Well, it was a great band. It was like the Who backing up a singer-songwriter, It was really powerful band and good songs, and it was pretty remarkable.
Were you hip to Austin City Limits at the time?
Oh yeah, You know, when I moved to Austin in 1975, early 75, and went to a lot of the shows. I saw Ry Cooder and Flaco Jimenez, and I saw the Nashville Super Pickers. And, I'd go almost every week. The tickets were free. You didn't have to enter a lottery to get a ticket. There's too many people out there now. You gotta win the lottery to go to a national park. I'm not sure. I saw other people play later on, play Austin City Limits shows, and all of a sudden become way more known nationally. I saw that happen to Jimmy LaFave because he hadn't toured like Lucinda did, and he wasn't well known, but suddenly he was, and he could travel around the country and draw a crowd. It's like, it is kind of magical.
What was y'all's stage volume like back then?
Loud. I was playing through a twin reverb. Didn't matter what size stage I was on. I could be outside in front of 15,000 people or in a club with 100 people. I'd set my twin on 4. That's loud.
Yeah. Were you using a tube screamer or anything like that?
I always used a MXR Dynacomp. I kind of was going for a clean slashing sound. I remember one time we played in London, and it was like like Dylan getting booed or something. There was some hardcore folkies there, and I think I was playing through a Marshall 412 cabinet or something, and it's theater. But I know I've been doing this all my life. I know how to, don't tell me I'm too loud because I'm the correct volume, The sound person is in charge of making it all balanced, And somebody said, turn it down the guitar so we can hear the lady sing. And Lucinda lit into him. She said, hey, we're doing what we do. You adapt, She was good about stuff like that.
I guess we ended up at Car Wheels or whatever.
Yeah, we worked on that album a lot. We spent years, and it just, she had some problems, and it just, she kept putting it off because she wasn't happy with herself, and it just turned into I guess people would call it a toxic situation. I wasn't feeling good about the relationship, and it just got to the point where I was better off not being involved, so I quit. Well, I enjoyed playing those great songs live on stage. All the songs from that Rough Trade album are just really good. Sweet Old World is about as good as a song can be. And the band was so good. It was joy, except when it wasn't. Oh yeah, that was the first real record that I produced, and that just turned into a long period of me producing records for a living. There have been these arcs in my life, and I don't see them till 10 years later, but I became a record producer after that, I'm not sure I'm still a record producer. I haven't had anyone in my studio since COVID started, and I haven't performed since COVID started. It's kind of like a forced retirement. It may change. I don't know. I don't see these things until I look back at them. I had quit Lucinda's band and waited for the calls to come in, and the calls didn't come in. And then I was up for the Bob gig as the steel player. Through friends that were in the band, just part of it, through Buddy Miller and Larry Campbell and people like that. And I was the guy. I could have cut the gig without a rehearsal. I know all those songs, and it would have been good. I saw him that summer in Toronto, and I could have nailed that gig that night, And I was just waiting for the call. I had talked to his manager and a few times, and I sent in some video, and I was waiting for the call, and it just wasn't coming. It wasn't coming, and we were getting ready to head up north for the summer, and I gave up. And then I found out later, like years later, that Bob had called my house, and the outgoing message on my machine, I had William Shatner singing Mr. Tambourine Man. it had been on there for years, I loved that track. It was just goofy and Shatner in his inimitable way. And I found out that Bob had called my house and heard it, and he didn't know what it was. He thought it was me doing an imitation of him. He said, I'm not going to hire that guy. But it wasn't meant to happen. I want to meet William Shatner. I hope I get to, because I want to talk to him about it. I think he owes me a dinner or something.
Was it the Golden Throats?
Yeah. Oh, what a crazy album. Leonard Nimoy and these people who shouldn't be singing were singing. Lauren Green.
Didn't Shatner do Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds?
Probably so. I think he had an old album of that stuff. But the Golden Throats was the Rhino compilation of those things. Yeah, all those people, they did. Sebastian Cabot was doing a Dylan song, It's because someone had an idea, You get an idea, and then the next thing you're supposed to do is stop and think, is this a good idea? I played on the soundtrack with Jerry Lee of Great Balls of Fire. And I was a good friend of Billy Swan's, who lives here in Nashville. And Billy Swan was associated with this movie. T-Bone Burnett was producing the soundtrack for the movie. And Billy called me in to play guitar on it. So I spent, maybe it was only one day or maybe 2 days in the studio with Jerry Lee. It was totally exciting. You spend your whole life as a musician learning how not to speed up or slow down. And Jerry Lee would start at a certain place and it would just ramp up. And I remember the first song, we just said, let's play the song. And we started. And by the end of it, I was out of breath. It was so exciting. And it didn't matter because he just sped up like crazy. It was exciting. I remember sitting around with T-Bone and the band waiting for Jerry Lee on the first day. And he got to be like 2 or 3 hours late. And then he had played a gig in Vegas the night before. And we were waiting for him to fly in from Vegas. And then suddenly we got a call, or T-Bone got a call, and he comes back into the room. He goes, hey, get this. Jerry Lee decided to fly home to Memphis instead of coming here today. And we're sitting there going, how cool is that? Anybody but Jerry Lee, we'd have been pissed off, but like, how cool is that? Jerry Lee blew us off, It sounded so great. I mean, it sounded, he would do them in keys that were lower, because he was considerably older than, when he was starting out. So he might, the song might be in C on the record, and he'd want to do it in G or something, and then T-Bone would say, yeah, that was a pretty good take. Can we take it up to C sharp? Up to G sharp, And so we do that. He could play piano fluently in every key. I was amazed by that. Whip off a solo in any key. He was a great piano player. And then T-Bone would say, well, that was good. Let's try A. And he was just nudging him up, trying to get it, because the film was Jerry Lee's story, and he wanted it to, kind of sound like Jerry Lee at the time. And Jerry Lee was like reluctant. He was sort of irascible, but T-Bone was doing the job, getting him up there, But he was remarkably great. Yeah, one of the top few, Yeah, totally unique. I mean, his whole essence is totally unique, The balance of the devil and the Lord, That's really something.
If you had to listen to some Jerry Lee right now, what would you go towards?
Oh, any of that early stuff, Breathless, Great Balls of Fire. Great Balls of Fire is amazing,
So were you in the room? Were you all cutting in the same room?
Yeah, we were in
all of that.
A studio called Ocean Way, which was a big studio in Hollywood, and all in the same room. And there's David Kemper on drums and Jerry Sheff on bass and me on guitar. And I remember at one point, what's his name? The guitar player that played with Ricky Nelson, James Burton came in, and T-Bone comes to me. He goes, would it be okay if James Burton played your telly on this song? I'm going, nah, I don't, I'm not, that doesn't fly, you know. Come on. And, you know, James Burton played my telly, and of course he was great, you know. I'm not going to say no to that, you know.
Are you credited in that, in the movie?
No, on the album.
On the album, yeah.
No, Billy Swan called me up at one point, and he said there was a problem, and you didn't make the credits. And I think, Jerry McGee played some of the guitar, and he was a L.A. guitar player guy. He was in the Ventures sometimes, not the original Ventures, but a later day version of the Ventures, and he was really great. He wasn't there when I was there, but he got the credit. I don't think James Burton got credit either. But it didn't matter to me because I knew I did it, you know.
Did you get to have any kind of interaction, like talking with him at all?
Yeah, a bunch of times, just the two of us, you know, like people would leave the room or we'd be out in the hall or something, and he would chat, you know, and he called me Killer. I didn't want to say anything at the time, but I'm thinking, man, that is cool. It's like, of course, he called everybody Killer. I did a Writers in the Round with Lucinda at the Mariposa Folk Festival, late 80s, early 90s, and Prine was there, and because I can play with people, I know how to do it and not get in the way. I got to play Paradise with him. And there's not a better song than Paradise, and that was just an absolute thrill. And then he played a gig one time, and I was in Chicago and had the night off, and he played a gig in like the Chicago Opera House. Maybe it was an old ornate theater. It was really, really nice. And of course, he sold it out in Chicago, and I was in the dressing room. At the end of the show, it's a heavy-duty union place, fines for, you know, going over the curfew. And he finished his last song and, you know, not the encore yet, but he got back in there and someone connected with the building or the venue said, John, you have like 2 minutes and 50 seconds, and otherwise it's going to be a $25,000 fine. You know, so you have to, you know, if you go out and play a song, you're going to have to make it a real short one. And I said, John, don't you have a $25,000 song? And he said, I might have a couple of 12,500 ones I could play. He went out and played 2 minutes and 49 seconds and got in under the wire somehow. But I did a lot of work with Wylie Hubbard over the years. I met him and we just hit it off, and we had similar tastes in music. We just had this conversation at my house one day, and you know, it was an introductory meeting kind of. I said, you know, all I'm listening to these days are like prison chain gang recordings, you know, and I was just loving those. He goes, oh man, I'm listening to work crew recordings, and so we just hit it off, and I started producing records for him, and I think I did like 5 records for him, something like that. And you know, he had never done an Austin City Limits show, and you know, he could have done one when they started, you know, which was 74, I think. You know, I mean, he should have. You know, he was well known then, and you know, they were Wylie and B.W. Stevenson, and these people were all doing the show. But for some reason, and I don't know what happened, but Ray never got one. And then into the, you know, the 90s and the double noughts and the teens, you know, like people were writing, you know, they were signing petitions, you know, put Ray on Austin City Limits, and it just wasn't happening. And finally they offered him a show. And I think it was not long after COVID started. They claimed to not know why he never had gotten one, and that's possible, you know. Oversight, I don't know, but it never happened. But they get him a show, and he called me up and said, oh, we're going to do Austin City Limits. I want you to play bass with me. And I said, well, let me think about this. I'm pretty much quarantining, you know, because I don't want the COVID. And I decided that I had to do it. And so I And this was very early on. We didn't know about N95 masks or anything. It was just, I had a little mask on my face that I wore all day long. I was there for like 10 hours or something. You arrive in the afternoon and you sound check, and there's a dinner break, and then you come back and you perform the show. It took all day, and there was no audience because of COVID. And I called up Ray. I said, your jokes are hilarious, but there's going to be dead silence. And I had watched people like Stephen Colbert suddenly have to deal with this uncomfortable silence when they would deliver a line. I said, Ray, you got to think about this. This is not going to be easy. And so we did it. There was only the crew there, and there might have been, 20 people on the crew. I don't know how many there were, but and they were very polite and applauding, but they told us that they would pad the sound with some applause and make it seem more natural. But it was really weird to not play to anyone. And I think they had someone else scheduled to come in the next week, and half the people on the crew got COVID and they had to cancel that one. So we were there all day, and they gave everyone a hotel room in the adjacent hotel. For dinner was room service by myself in this hotel. But a guy had to come into my room and put the tray down. And, we didn't know anything at the time, so I was really trying to not get sick. And it worked out fine. It was just weird doing the show without an audience.
So this is the perfect place for a joke about, you've played Nashville, so you know what it's like to not play to an audience.
Industry town, Remember I was playing with Michael Penn. He had a hit single back in the early 90s, and we did this national tour and did really well everywhere. You got a hit single, you got people coming out to your shows, and then we get to LA and we played the Wiltern Theater, and they telling us, yeah, that show's sold out, I think, well, this will be great, end of the tour. And it was like half empty. And people had bought tickets, but because it's an industry town, they just didn't show up. And it was always the same in Nashville, you get there expecting a giant crowd, and they were just jaded. People coming through town all the time. Not in New York, though. That was always great. New York was great. From the first time I played there, every gig afterward was amazing. Well, he just needed to know that his timing was going to be thrown. And he did it really well. I was proud of him. He didn't talk as much as he would have, But the benefit of the next show being canceled was we got the whole hour. You play for an hour and a half or whatever, and then they usually split their hour-long show with two acts. And so we were going to get 30 minutes or 27 minutes or however long that works out to. And so we got the whole show. So, most of our set was included. That was in our favor.
I was impressed by how well they put the canned audience in there.
It didn't seem unnatural. Yeah.
Was this like a big sense of accomplishment for Ray?
Yeah, it was. We were vibrating at the end. It was a great show. Ray was great. I noticed a few times in between songs he was totally out of breath, and so was I. It was, we deserved to be up there, and we acquitted ourselves really well. It was, we had done a couple of rehearsals, and the band was good, and I knew if we got out there and swaggered, everything would be fine. The swagger's the key. That was always the deal with Lucinda and that great band. We'd get ready to go on stage, and ready to swagger, I've played bass most of my life, I got a bass when I was 19 or something, and it's a different instrument than a guitar. It's a different approach, and some guitar players can't be bass players, they just don't know how to do that. But I just instinctively did from the get-go. And, when I was living in LA in the 80s, for a while there, I was doing a lot of pickup gigs, casuals, and somebody would need a bass player. And so I played bass a lot in Nashville, and I played guitar a lot, and I played steel a lot. And there would be like groups of people that only knew me as a bass player or only as a steel player, because that's what this act would call me for. And then, like I go on Austin City Limits with Lucinda, and people are going, "You play guitar too?" It's like, yeah, well. So anyhow, I played bass a lot, and I don't know how long it'd been. I don't know how long it'd been since I had played a gig, but I played bass with Blaze all the time. It was when we did duo stuff, it was mostly me and him and me on bass, because he finger picked so well. He filled it up, Yeah. Well, when the band was big, which it was sometimes, and we had Terry Wilson playing bass, who was a great bass player, and I'd go on the guitar, but the duo gigs were mostly me on bass. I was on tour in Florida, and I had a day off in Tampa, going to go fishing with my friend Bruce, and we hooked his boat up to the back of his pickup, and we were heading for Tampa Bay, going to put the boat in, and he pulled over at this place to go in and get some sandwiches, and I just stayed in the truck, and I was sitting in his truck, and suddenly I had this very uncomfortable feeling, and it went from my left shoulder to my right shoulder, just like when you get a crick in your neck or your back or something, you figure you can move and it'll go away, and it went away. It lasted about 15 seconds or something, and I just, it was not like anything I'd ever felt before. And so, I don't know what that was. I hope it never happens again. And it seemed so inconsequential that when Bruce got back in the truck, I didn't tell him that I had felt uncomfortable or anything. It went away. We went fishing. And so the next day I had a gig in Orlando. And I got up and I was getting ready to get in the shower, and I turned the water on, took all my clothes off, and all of a sudden, I was just about to step in, all of a sudden I had this thing again, shoulder to shoulder. But this one was kind of painful. I knew it was connected. And I thought, now that, I don't know, but that might be a heart attack. I'm not sure. But I decided that being naked and wet was not a good idea. So I turned the water off. I didn't get in the shower. And like I said, this one was painful. But this one lasted like 30 seconds or something, 40 seconds. I don't know what it was. But then it went away. But I was thinking that could have been a heart attack. I got to get this checked out. But it went away. So I thought, I could drive. My gig was at like 1 p.m, like a house concert in Orlando. And I thought, I could go do the gig, come back to Tampa, spend the night, and then the next morning check into a hospital and see if I'm okay, And I thought, if I'm driving over from Tampa to Orlando, I had known somehow that chewing aspirin is good if you're having a heart attack. And I didn't have any aspirin, so I thought, I'll stop on the way there and I'll get aspirin, just in case it happens again. And I actually got off the interstate a couple of times and went into these stores, and they didn't have any aspirin. They had every pain reliever known to man, but no Bayer aspirin. And so twice I had failed. And so then I'm just driving along, and all of a sudden I'm in this giant traffic jam trying to get around Disney World. And I'm dead stopped in the fast lane. Cars are just creeping along, and all of a sudden it happens again. Although this time was the most pain I'd ever felt in my life. Same exact thing, shoulder to shoulder. And I'm going, I'm having a heart attack. This is awful. And I thought, I could call 911, but I'm in a traffic jam. They won't be able to get to me. And so I put my right turn signal on, and as cars inched up, it took maybe a minute or so, I got into the middle lane. And I put my right turn signal on again, and as cars inched up, it took another minute or more. I got into the slow lane, and I just went to the shoulder, and I zoomed up the shoulder going about 90 miles an hour and came to the exit, first exit I came to, and I got off. I'm coming around this curve on the exit, and I saw a Florida tourist shop, place that I would never go in. Like they have sunglasses and stupid T-shirts and, oversized sunglasses and, just a tourist trap. But then I thought, tourists are hungover. They'll want aspirin. They're going to have aspirin in this shop. So I'm still having this intense pain. Really, really hurt. The most pain I'd ever felt. And so I go into this place, and maybe I was kind of lightheaded or something, but the place was lit with black lights inside, I think. It seemed like it was. And I looked around, and I remember finding bare aspirin in this rack of pain relievers, and I just broke into the box and I started chewing them dry. I think I ate 7 or 8 maybe, and then it was awful. I mean, I don't know if you ever even tasted the slightest bit of aspirin tablet. It's awful. And I chewed 7 or 8 and swallowed them dry, and went up to the counter and paid for the aspirin. I don't know why I didn't think to buy water too, but I was compromised at the moment, And I get to the counter, and there's this big, dumb 19-year-old kid working there. And I thought, well, I could tell him that I'm having a heart attack, and he could call 911. And then I thought, I don't want to die in a Florida tourist shop. I would rather die in my little rent car. So I paid for the aspirin, and I went out to the rent car to die. And I got in the rent car, and it passed. It had lasted at least 5 minutes, intense pain shoulder to shoulder. And then I thought, okay, it passed. 10 minutes from the gig. Now I better find a hospital. So I put a hospital into the GPS, and I remember it was 4.8 miles back down the other side of the freeway that didn't have a traffic jam on that side. And so I screamed down there. I was going 95 miles an hour, and I got off at the first exit and wound around, and I found this hospital in a town called Celebration, Florida. I was celebrating. And so I find the emergency room. I pull up there. There's a sign that says valet parking. And I thought, oh, man, I hope I have some 1s or a 5 or something. Or what if I don't, And there were 2 cars stopped there right at the valet parking sign. And so I parked behind them and waited a minute or two, and there wasn't any action. So I got out and I walked up and I looked at each car. There was no one in those cars. There was no valet person. I looked in the door. I couldn't see anything. I got back in my car and I drove. I found the main parking lot of the hospital, which was like maybe a quarter mile away or something. And I put my guitar in the trunk and organized what I had. And I said, if I'm going to be in here for a while, I want my laptop, my phone, got all my stuff, and walked back to the emergency room. And I walked in the front door, and this kind of a young guy came up to me, and I said, I think I just had a heart attack. And he said, are you a doctor? I said, no. And he said, well, then why not let us make the diagnosis? Like, oh, welcome to Celebration, Florida, Anyhow, they checked me out, and they did like a EKG thing, they put the things on you, and they said, well, we'll be back in a while. So I called the gig, and I said, I might have had a heart attack. If they come in and clear me, I can be there in 15 minutes. And the guy said, oh, that's great. There's people came out from out of the woodwork, we got a big crowd. And then they came back like a half an hour later. They said, you had a heart attack, and you're going to need a stent. And I guess they took me for x-rays and stuff. And anyhow, they decided to put a stent in, and I waited all of that day, and they didn't do it. And they were going to do it the next day, and then there was some sort of problem. They didn't get to it the next day, and then on the third day, they had to ambulance me over to another branch of the hospital for some reason. And so I got to ride in one of those big ambulances, videoing out the back. And I'd never been in an ambulance before, and that was kind of fun. Get to the hospital, and they prep me for this stent procedure. The surgeon comes in, and I talked to him for about 20 minutes. He was really smart, really sharp. He was from Fort Worth, Texas. I liked him a lot. And he explained everything that was going to happen. He had a little team of a couple assistants, and he said, you know, you're going to be conscious during this stent procedure. I have to talk to you. We're going to give you a relaxant, so you'll be somewhat sedated. But what we're going to do is enter through your groin and go up an artery. We're going to open an artery and go up with a camera and the stent. And we're going to go up the right side in this artery, and we're going to over the top of your heart, and then we're going to go down into the lower left quadrant, which is where you had your blockage. And he said, you had what's known as the widowmaker. He said, you're lucky to be here. And there was a video screen right next to me. I'm sitting on the table at this point. And he said, you can watch as the camera goes up, you know, and you'll see all this. So they shave me, and they're ready to open an artery. And he said, oh, by the way, I do this all the time. I'm the stent doctor. This is what I do all day long. It's kind of run-of-the-mill procedure, you know. But since we're opening an artery, if you were to like lose control and start thrashing around or something, you could bust a gusset and bleed out in about a minute and die. And I said, no movement here, you know, fine, do your stuff. So here we go, and he's entering my groin, and I realized there was music on in the operating room as they're opening my artery. And it was Desperado by the Eagles. And I thought, oh man, this guy just told me that I could die. And what if I die and the last thing I hear before I go is Don Henley? I can't live with that. And so I thought about asking him to change the music. And then I second guessed that, and I thought, no, if he wants opera on, I want my surgeon comfortable. I want him to have whatever you know. He could play Barry Manilow, and I'll put up with it if he does a great job. So I'm laying there on the table. I'm looking at the video screen. It's fascinating, and he gets up, getting ready to go into the heart. He goes, all right, we're going to do this now, and you're going to have the heart attack pain again, but it's only going to last 15 or 20 seconds. And as soon as I get the stent into place, it'll open up. You won't have any blockage, and you'll immediately feel normal. And I said, okay, no thrashing here. And suddenly I'm having it again, the heart attack symptoms again. And this was the worst one. And it was the same exact thing, shoulder to shoulder. This is where blood wasn't flowing to. And I was trying really hard not to thrash it. I think it was really awful. And I think I was moving around a little bit. And then I realized that the song that was playing in the operating room at that moment was I Won't Back Down by Tom Petty. I thought, that's a song I can die to and live with.